When you connect to a CockroachDB cluster, you'll either be thinking about using a password or a certificate. It's also possible to harness your SSO identity provider and JWT tokens in place of the password to connect to your cluster. Today, I'll show you how to do that with GCP and Ori. First, we'll take a look at GCP. I'll spin up a CockroachDB cluster. I'll have a look at my auth list, and we can see that my rob@cockroachlabs.com account is listed. If I print my identity token, this generates a JWT token that I'll be able to use in CockroachDB to connect to the cluster. Next, I'll create a user called Rob. You might want to automate this with something like Terraform. And next, I'll configure some cluster settings. First, I'll enable the JWT authentication method. Next, I'll configure my JWT audience. I'll be referencing the user by their email address, so I'll point CockroachDB to that claim in the JWT. I'll automatically fetch the JWKs. I'll define the issuer as being accounts.google.com. That will allow CockroachDB to look up the well-known JWT properties for that issuer, including the JWKs. Next, I'll configure my map configuration. This maps any user from the accounts.google.com identity provider and creates a regular expression capture group that slurps out this value from any string matching something at cockroachlabs.com and maps that to a user in CockroachDB using the first capture group it encounters. And at this point, we're ready to log in as the Rob user using my email address and Google authentication. If I try to log in without a password, we'll see that I'm prompted to add one. However, if I connect with my JWT token, I connect, no problem. And that will go for any user in that GCP account with a Cockroach Labs email address. Now we'll move on to Ori. In this example, I'll use Hydra and Kratos to create my own identity provider. So there'll be more steps involved, but in doing so, I would have created my own identity provider. First, I'll start Hydra and Kratos. Next, I'll create my application client ID. Now I'll sign up a new user. Then I'll generate a token for them. I'll grant access to the scopes it needs. And I'll copy the code I get back. This is the code I'll use to generate my JWT. I'll generate the JWT and copy that to my clipboard. And I'll fetch the identity for that user. That's their identifier in Ori. Now I'll start CockroachDB, create a user called Rob again. I'll enable JWT authentication. This time my audience will be the client ID in Ori. I'll be using the sub claim in the JWT to identify a user. I'll enable JWK auto fetch. My issuer will be my locally running instance of the Ori stack. My identity mapping will use the Ori stack, and it will map this ID for the identity I just created for Rob and map it to the Rob user. You can create a token hook service, which will inject a webhook call from Hydra, allowing you to add custom claims to the token, for example, the email, if you want to go that way. With that set up, I can authenticate to the cluster. There are a bunch of ways you can use SSO and JWT to authenticate users to your cluster, and it might be preferable over generating usernames and passwords for each of your users. In the Ori setup, you'll have to use something like the token hook if you're authenticating service accounts. Otherwise, if it's just users, there's a UI option as well. Have a look at the documentation and let us know if you have any questions.